Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Ann Arbor District Library. We've been very fortunate to have Michael Bierylo, or MB, join us this evening. He's an electronic musician, guitarist, composer, sound designer. He's been a faculty member for the Berklee College of Music in Boston since 1995, and is currently the chair of the Electronic Production and Design Department. He's also a member of an amazing band called Bird Songs of the Mesozoic. He's played places like the Knitting Factory. His compositions are featured on releases Dancing on AA, Petrophonics, The Iridium Controversy, The Extreme Spirituals, and he's done a lot of things that are very interesting, so check him out. We've been buying his compositions here at the library. You can check him out here, and he's going to talk to us about modular synthesizers and live performance, and then give a performance for us. Welcome, MB.
Great, thank you so much, John. Big shout out to John Berklee, who has invited me and brought me in here. So it's such a pleasure for me to be here in Ann Arbor. I think I may have seen some of you yesterday at U of M for a class visit. That was really inspiring. It's kind of interesting because this is kind of a circle coming around. I spent my first 2 years of college here in Ann Arbor at University of Michigan, so it's kind of cool being back here in Ann Arbor. So what I want to do today is just talk a little bit, and Jean talked to you a little bit about my background, but really my area of real interest is in technology and performing with technology. And I'm a guitar player, and I've done that all my life. But it seems that every new piece of music technology that's come out, I've kind of figured out a way to perform with it. A lot of people, when technology comes out, they'll produce something, and I do that too. But I enjoy performing, so that's been kind of, for me, a pathway that I've followed. This picture here is actually from a loft years ago with my first modular, my laptop, and just some other stuff, my iPad, trying to get all this stuff to work together to make music. But what I've been doing lately is working with modular synthesizers. And at Berklee, this is kind of like the cornerstone of our program in electronic production and design. One of the main pillars that we use is, sound synthesis. And so that's been a really important thread through a lot of my work, learning more about it, teaching it, and evangelizing to a certain extent. How many of you here actually own any type of modular synthesizer? Awesome. Great. So today I'm going to talk a little bit, take a few questions. I'll do a performance, and I can take some questions afterwards. And would be lovely to have like a kind of a conversation develop at some point. But after the official program, I'm here for a while. If any of you want to come, take a look at this, ask questions, trade tips or whatever, I'm in no hurry to run out the door. So just to talk a little bit about where this, for me, kind of comes from. To think about, the synthesizer, there's really two roots to synthesizers, at least in the United States. So number one, there's the East Coast School. Does anybody know this jolly-looking gentleman here in the picture? Yes? Dr. Robert Moog. And so Dr. Robert Moog came out with a modular synthesizer. I believe about 1964 was when he first started selling these things. But in 1968, there was a record came out by Wendy Carlos called Switched on Bach. How many people have heard of that? How many people own it? How many people own the copy where Wendy was Walter on the cover? Okay, I own the old one, so that's cool. So this was really, for most people in 1968, this is how they discovered what a synthesizer was. I didn't practice that one for today, so. But that was done in 1967, 1968, and that was done on a multi-track recording, all with a Moog modular synthesizer. Now, Bob had the idea that any musician should be able to walk up to a synthesizer and work with it. They should be able to have immediate access to a synthesizer. So one of the things that he felt that was important is that a synthesizer have a keyboard. So all of his instruments had keyboards. And he also came up with a couple different things that really allowed these things to emulate the kinds of things that acoustic instruments did. So things like an envelope generator, low-pass filter, these things really kind of let you use the instrument to kind of imitate the performance gestures, the articulations you get in a brass instrument. And so consequently, what we just heard, yeah, it kind of sounded like, you were not fooling anybody that this is an orchestra, but it kind of sounded like very familiar types of instrumental sounds. So that's the East Coast. And so by and large, much of what we all know about synthesizers comes from this, because typically, you know, when you think of a synthesizer, many of us think of a synthesizer as having a keyboard. Thank you, Bob Moog. Now, on the other coast, on the West Coast, there's another gentleman. You might know this gentleman. This is Don Buchla. So Don Buchla was in Berklee, California about the same time. And so Don, had the idea that we have this new instrument. We have a new way of making sounds. Why don't we have a completely new way of making music? He had absolutely no interest whatsoever in having this thing do anything to do with what an instrument already did. So that was really his idea, his design. If you take a look at his instrument here, there's no keyboard. He didn't care about a keyboard. He just wanted you to have access to electronic sounds. Now, the same year, 1968, a gentleman named Morton Subotnick came out with a record called Silver Apples to the Moon. It was actually the first recording that was commissioned for an electronic instrument on a record label. So None Such Records commissioned Morton Subotnick to create a composition specifically for a record. So this was kind of a new thing, because usually you'd have something that was, a performance that you'd record and release and stuff like that. So here's a little bit of Silver Apples. So yeah, 1968, same year, very different approach. Needless to say, Switched on Bach, went out to be probably the largest selling classical music record of all time. And not a lot of people heard of Silver Apples. But in a big way, these two perspectives have come with us. And in this day and age, when we think about electronic music in any form, these two worlds kind of come together. We don't really say, oh, this has Switched on Bach or Silver Apples. These things kind of merge. So that's kind of really a little bit about just the background of modular synthesizers, because in 1968, that's the only thing you could do. So synthesizers, the whole history of commercial instruments kind of rolled on from there. And kind of got us to where we are now, where there's been a huge resurgence in interest in modulars. So in this day and age, in 2023, why in the heck would you want to do something with this when you could probably do really cool stuff with your iPad? So a few thoughts, a few ideas. One, it's highly personal. You make this thing yourself. You design it, you build it to do exactly what you want to do. So it's not like I'm finding an instrument, I like this instrument, I'm going to buy it and learn what it does. For some musicians, artists, producers, the idea of actually designing and building something that really fits them is really cool. So that's one of the things that you can do with this. And the instrument that I have here, these are all modules by different manufacturers that I've kind of chosen and set up and designed to work in a certain way. So nobody else in the world probably has the exact same thing. So it's, for me, it's very unique, very personal. So there's a lot to enjoy about that. The other thing is the idea of something as tactile. We live in a world that, is full of software. And so at Berklee College of Music, a lot of the students who come into our program, they learned about synthesis, with GarageBand or something that was on their computer. And the idea that you actually plugged things in and routed things and had your hands on how you make sound is really cool. It's really different. The other thing that's really great is that your brain kind of gets wired as you make these connections. It really helps you learn certain things. So the tactile sound making thing is, I think, a big attraction. The other thing, and again, there's a certain beauty into something that's ephemeral. You go on a walk, you see a flower, you'll never see the exact same flower exactly the same way in the same light again. It's there, gone. You can take a picture, but that thing is special. So with this, you'll never get the exact same sound exactly the same again. So you can set up a sound. It's absolutely beautiful. It's absolutely cool. Enjoy it. It'll go away. During sound check today, there was one sound, there's a couple things that were really cool. No matter what I do in about 10, 15 minutes, I'll never get that back. So hopefully for you all, I'll get something that's as cool, if not cooler. But the ephemeral nature of that, I think, is kind of special to a certain group of people. Now, gives you a completely different sound palette. So again, with the whole idea that you design it yourself, I cannot get the sounds out of a commercial instrument if I get out of this. Just won't happen. I can get some of the same things, but what I can do with this is very different from what I would do with a commercial off-the-shelf synthesizer. Now, finally, it's addictive. And I'll say, for those of you who've gotten into this, this is a real thing. Once you start getting into this, it really becomes addictive. And back in Boston, I have a number of my colleagues. I think, in Boston, we could start a 12-step program for people who, in fact, are into this whole thing, which has its own charms and perils in and of itself. Now, the other thing to remember is that as of this morning, there's a listing called Modular Grid that lists every module that you can get online. And as of this morning, there were 14,394 modules available. So a lot to choose from. So it's a pretty big thing at this point. So, all right, so that's kind of why we're doing this. Now, in terms of performing, I kind of take a lot of things that I do from the blueprint set up by somebody named Susan Ciani. Anybody hear of Suzanne Ciani? Okay. So Suzanne, in 1974, she did work for Don Buchlow, and I think she worked for very little, except that I think he gave her modules, Buchlow 200 series modules. And so in the early 70s, she was performing with very early instruments, doing live quadraphonic performances. She got a grant from the National Endowment of the Arts to develop this, and she did a report in 1974 on how exactly she performed with the Buchlow. And it's really astonishing because to this day, it really describes how she performs, specific to this instrument, but it really is that her performance practice has followed these same principles. So it's kind of, in terms of performing with these things, it's kind of the Rosetta Stone of sorts. So in it, she talks about very specifics, how to perform with this particular instrument. And she talks about creating distinct musical ideas, which is a really cool thing to think about because she frames working with this technology in terms of music. She's a classically trained pianist. She got her master's in composition from UC Berkeley. So everything that she does is really connected to music, and she frames things in terms of musical ideas. So she defines the pitches that she uses. So she has a series of rows of pitches that she uses in every performance to this day. So that's spelled out in this report. And then she talks a lot in here about improvisation strategies and how she improvises rhythmically and to a certain extent melodically. And then she talks about how you get between different sections. So when Suzanne performs, she has about, I think, 11 or 12 different sections that she kind of uses as points of departure. So that's, for me, it's been kind of a bit of a blueprint in framing how I would think about performing this crazy thing. So let's take a look at what this is. So right now, there's a couple main parts to this. The part that's on the top, these are all sound modules. And at the very top row, each of these modules generates a sound. In the second row underneath, these modules control how those sounds are generated and how they change. So that's essentially what's going on here. Now, right in front of me is a performance control that gives me lots of ways in a performance that I can get my hands on this and manipulate this in real time. So it really is the top part here. This is the sound. This is the control. Some of these things I can generate things by touch. Some generate things automatically. So that's how this whole thing works in a very broad sense. Now, when I work on developing ideas for this, I develop systems. And I'm not going to go too deeply into this technically, but what I do is I take a selection of modules and say, okay, these modules can give me certain types of sounds. And each of these sounds represents a system. And each of those systems represents one of the sound generating modules. So if I take a look, each one represents a main sound source. I can use these to perform either solo or in groups. So it's a way for me to organize things. And then each system can be transformed. So the idea is I have a system, I may start out using it so it sounds one way, but I can change how it sounds and what it's doing. So it allows me to create some variations in the context of a performance. And so I try and have variations, but I also try and limit these to a few so I can actually remember what they do. So part of it to me is just setting up this thing in such a way that I can have access to it and know what instinctively will create musical sound ideas. So in this, if we take a look at just one of them, if I take a look at this one module, I can use to create sounds that are drones, melodic ideas, rhythmic ideas. So this is kind of a diagram of, here's a module, here's how it's controlled. And all of these modules that I have here can be divided up into these systems. So I don't want to necessarily go deep into the weeds on what each of these things are, how it operates, why I chose them. But just for you as the listener, just to know that organizationally, I have some idea of how I'm going to break this system down into smaller parts, smaller germs, smaller cells that I can use to create musical ideas. So I have, really out of these, I have 5 of them. So I'll just breeze through this. Oh, too fast. And so with this, I can start to plan out a form. I can say, I'm going to start with system 1. And then about halfway through a performance, I'll bring in system 2. and then system 3 comes in, I'll fade out system 1. So it's a way for me to think about how do I organize a musical composition that I'm by and large going to improvise. How do I organize which modules I'm going to use, what they're going to do, and actually how this might make sense musically. So it's a really simple idea. And ultimately, if I want to plan a performance, knowing this, I can do this, at the pretzel bell on a bar napkin. I can say, this is the form I'm going to use at the library. Okay? So that, it really is kind of simply how I break these things down. So for you as the audience, what I'd like to do is maybe share some ideas of things that you might want to listen for. So listen to elements like drones. So a drone is a sustained sound. And it's going to change somehow. It'll have hopefully have some life to it. So think about, if you're listening to a sound, is it a drone? And if it's a drone, does it stay that way or does it change into something else? So that's one kind of musical sound. And then there's melodic gestures. Some will be simple, some will be more complex, but things that are kind of single lines. So listen for, how do I use a drone against a melodic gesture? And is that melodic gesture simple, sustained, or is it a rhythmic melodic gesture? And then think about, do I have something that's a purely rhythmic gesture? Okay, is it a rhythm? Or is it something that's got pitch to it, but also has a rhythm? And listen for things like how a drone might change into something that's rhythmic. So something that has the same sound characteristic that kind of changes functions. And let's see. And then I use loops. I use audio. I use samples. So I have a sample in here. And think about how that's used. Is it a looped performance, or am I taking little pieces of an audio performance and chopping those things up and using that as a rhythm? So that's something that's not a synthesized sound, that's a recorded sound. And then listen to things that might just be fragments of audio. Just a little piece of audio. It's not synthesized, it's recorded from someplace. And how that gets thrown in, how that gets mangled, and how I can use that. So those are some, 5 kinds of sound gestures that I'll be using that you can kind of listen for and see how this all works together. So, questions? Thoughts? Anybody? Yeah. No, it's super. It's interesting that you point that out, because I think one of the things that makes music successful is having a form. And so if you look at Beethoven's symphony, that has a form. Well, I kind of. But these are all going to be electronic. I'm not going to be emulating any sound of any type of traditional instrument. But that's exactly the point. Is that what people do with electronic music is part of this long kind of arc of music that has been with us forever. Yes? Think about, let's say, what a flute would do, and then think about what you might do with a xylophone or marimba. So an instrument that you're playing a very rhythmic part, but has pitches. So I should probably have said instead of, so rhythmic gesture, either pitched or no pitch. So a rhythmic gesture that doesn't have a pitch is a drum sound, but if it has pitch, it's something like a pitch percussion. Other questions, other thoughts? Yes? Yep. He still is, yeah. I still am a guitar player. I do it every morning. I wake up, I have my coffee, and I play guitar. So Steve Wilson, Porcupine Tree. Yeah, so he's a really adventurous guy. You know, he goes in a lot of different directions. I think he'll come back to the guitar. I mean, it's a point of reference for him, but I think for many of us in music, we're always looking for new things. And so he's always looking for new stuff. And so for sometimes, you know, his guitar playing can be pretty functional, but his music can be very experimental. So he's a pretty creative dude. So I wouldn't, you know, I think, you know, most musicians have many different layers, and the audience doesn't necessarily see all of those layers and what's in front of them public. And those layers change over time. So, yeah. Other questions? Yes?
I was curious how you think about like the identity of one of your pieces that you perform and like how it relates to the form. Like, do you think of it as a different version of the same piece when you use the same form? Like, I play the blues, I'm gonna play a different blues tonight. They're both blueses, but they're completely different pieces because they were improvised completely differently.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And so I think, you know, as I talked about yesterday, I think of it like jazz. You know, a jazz player will do a solo over a tune. The tune is going to be about the same every time, but the solo will never be the same. If anybody's a Jimi Hendrix fan, Jimi Hendrix like played this blues song called Red House. There's probably like 50 recordings of him playing Red House in various things, and they're all different. But it's still kind of that form. And I think for me, it changes, it morphs, but I kind of like the idea of keeping things set in a way that allows me to explore a little bit, but actually still kind of know what I can expect of something. So I'll be curious. You saw my set yesterday. I'm curious to see what you think of what I did today. Did I do the same thing? So we'll see. Hopefully, you know, we'll do things differently. Other questions? Yes?
I'm curious, so when you collect your sample audio recordings, do you try to find a recording really aligned with the synthesizer sound, or they can be totally distinguished?
I want it to be nothing to do with the synthesizer. So the one I'm going to use today is a piano. It was originally done on a piano. I have another one with a guitar. I was thinking of doing the guitar today. And then I have like Tibetan bells that I have. And so I like the idea of like in this electronic world, bringing other acoustic sources in. It just, for me, it makes the palette bigger. So it's not that I'm favor one or the other. I want a broad palette. But it's also for you, the audience. I want to give you different things to listen to. I want to surprise you in some sense. Oh, here's an electronic sound. Yeah, that's kind of cool. Oh, wow, that's a piano. So, yeah.
So follow that question. So if you want to extend your the sound palette, how can you merge them together? Also keep your music performance continuity.
Yeah, the continuity. So part of it, I mean, one of the things, you know, these modules can do a lot. And for each of these sound sources, I probably use 30% of what they do. So, you know, if I want to expand the palette a little bit, I could dig a little bit deeper into the module and find some new things that it'll do. Or I could, you know, just check out of my 12-step program and buy some more modules. So, but yeah, really good question. Really good question. Other questions? Okay, I'm going to play something for you a little bit, and we'll see what you think. We can have a conversation a little bit afterwards. Thanks. So let me ask you, did you like that? Was that cool? Now, did the explanation I give before help you kind of get you through this a little bit? All right, good. That's kind of like the idea, is to kind of prepare you to listen to this type of thing. So questions? Yeah, Dave Vrooman. So I want to introduce this gentleman here. David Vrooman was a former student of mine many years ago at Berklee College of Music, and he is now here in Ypsilanti, Michigan. So Ann Arbor. So, okay, big shout out. Big shout out to Dave. Hey.
I was wondering if you could walk us through the sample manipulation that you were doing.
Sure.
Specifically play the unaffected, and then talk about what you were doing. What stuck out to me was when you took it from a melodic form, and then I think through some filtering and manipulation of length, that we then turned it into more of a rhythmic element drone somewhere in that area. So I was just wondering if you could walk us through that.
Darn good question. So this is, this gets back to the idea of the system. So the system with the piano, let's bring this bad boy up. So that's the sample. It just repeats over and over again. Okay. So what I do with this is I put it through what's called a granular reverb, and this thing turns it into this big, juicy cloud. And then I'm controlling the size of the reverb. So it's kind of, if you can think about a sound existing in a small space, then the space getting bigger and smaller, that's kind of what's happening. So right now, you don't really hear the sound. Clearly, you hear it as kind of this cloud. And so part of what I do is bring this back, and gradually you hear that there's a piano in there. Okay? And then what I have is this controller is a mono grid controller. And so when I plug this in, it controls when I play back that sample. Okay? Okay, so that's, I'm just playing that back at different times. So. So I can change where that sample starts here. And I can change how that overlays. And then change a little bit how there's some randomness in some of the pitch things. So that's a different part of the sample, that piano playing. And I can make it very short. And then back in the cloud. It's pretty basic. Jay Dillon was doing this in like 1990 or something, so it's pretty basic as far as the technology goes. But that's kind of like what I incorporated in there. Good question. Yes?
Yeah. As we're watching it on the screen, it's less clear to me what the controller on the right controls.
Okay, yeah.
How it controls it, what, because I don't see any indication of how you know what you're touching and why. Yes.
So this is a grid, and so it's telling me when it's going to trigger sound. So that's how I create all the rhythms, just in this grid. And I can, it's a 16-step grid, so it can make it shorter, smaller in the fly. It can do a lot of different things, but it really, that's where all the rhythm comes from, is that thing.
So I'm a little confused. Does the grid control specific keys of the piano, or does it, like, is every grid essentially a loop of, like, the piano loop you've shown previously?
Right. So what that grid does, the one I'm using right now, is just sends a trigger. And a trigger is just a burst of voltage to say, do this. So right now, when it gets triggered to that module, it says, play that. That's it.
Play that loop.
Right. It has nothing to do with pitch. And then I also use this with another thing. So right now, let's say I have this, this drone. Let's bring up, I just love drones. Okay, so here, so there's my drone. So I can now mix this in so that this will control rhythms here. So yeah, does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Cool. Yes, hi.
Hey, towards the end of your piece, you had a low frequency, almost sounded like a drone, but it was, you could tell there was a super fast tempo.
Mm-hmm.
But on top, there's another sound, more like a melodic gesture.
Yeah.
So it's about halftime.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there are two different rhythmic.
Yeah, so what I can do is, so I have one module here that provides the overall clock for the whole thing. And I can make that clock faster or slower. That master clock will always stay the same, but it's going to something else that'll be faster or something else that'll be slower. So it allows me to take that same time base and divide it different ways. So I can have something that's ding, 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 ding. Exactly, on dot, 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 dot. So it gives me a little bit of rhythmic variety, a little bit of flexibility with that. But good question, thank you. Hi.
I'm just kind of curious about the role of the wires. Is each module independently controlled by the 16 step on the right, or are they like all interrelated?
Well, okay, so these wires basically control those sound modules, and they're from different sources. Some things are coming from that grid, some things are coming from like a sequencer. All the things on that skiff really output different types of control. So I have, let's say, so for this first module here that I open with, this kind of drone, a lot of what happens with that drone happens with this one module called pressure points. And I can sequence. So all those changes in sound come from that one module. And I can also do this. So that just one module is controlling that one other module. So that one's pretty, it's a dedicated thing.
I see. So is it like each module kind of feeds into the next?
Well, no, each module, the sound modules all go out to a mixer. But the modules that are controlling those sound modules, sometimes I split them off into different ones, sometimes they go to individual ones. So that's really what the kind of, mad scientist part of this whole thing is what controls what. and how does that, fit in with the overall shape of the piece. So that's where the game starts. That's where the fun starts, and that's where you get lost. That's the rabbit hole. Yes.
Two questions. We'll try the first one first. So, the piece you performed to us, you said earlier, you can never play the same thing twice, and you compared to jazz. What of that piece was a composition that you played before, and what of that piece was the improvised part? Or speak to that.
So we have somebody in the audience who watched me do this yesterday, and I wanted to ask you this. What do you think? What was different? What was the same? Was it the same piece? Was it a different piece?
I think it's totally different.
Uh,
I still can feel the similar structure as the art form.
Okay. What did you think?
I was going to say that I thought it was the same piece.
Yeah.
It's like when we observe the ocean waves.
Uh-huh.
You can never find each wave comes over and happen same, but they are always different. But we still can feel they are like a repetition.
Yeah, so what she was saying is that, there's that one sound. Today it was in a different place. So today, when I started, I usually will start with this. It's very simple, and it builds. And so I start with this. This low rumble and opens up. But while I was checking today, I had that. So when I started the piece, that started. That's not what I usually do, but I just went with it. So today, if you know, yeah. So it's an accident, but it's fun. And so I'm usually good with this. Something's different, or something does something I don't expect. Part of me says, how do I make this work with this? So I could have said, oh, excuse me, stop. This is not right. Let's do this again. I didn't, and I wouldn't.
Mike, we have time for one more question.
Okay, great. You want to do a follow-up, and I'll take one more.
Yeah, my question is more to you as, I might say the composer, the artist, the creator, I'll use creator.
Okay.
Is your intention as well as what we heard?
Yeah, my intention is to kind of follow a form because I think it will be entertaining to you, but to leave enough room so that I can make changes in it. And so this room sounds different than the room I was in yesterday. And so I could do things differently. There's some stuff I did yesterday that was really cool than I do today. There's some stuff today that was really cool I didn't do yesterday. So, but.
Yeah, so how in control are you with it? Or is it more like you're kind of fighting against it, trying to control it or like stay in control?
So I would say there are days I fight with it. There's days that I don't. But what I find is the more I do it, the less I fight with it. But it's always going to throw a curve at me. There's always going to be something, I just don't know what's going to happen next. I just don't. Or I forget something, or it's not patched in right, or I did something wrong. But you'll never know. So, all right, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Once again, thank you so much, John Bunkley, for inviting me. This has been a great pleasure for me to meet all you, to perform for you. And I'm going to hang out for a little bit if I can.
Yeah,
while the
of course.
crew's got to tear down. There's another show, but I'm here for a bit. So thank you to all of you.